This is ZEISS Presents Full Exposure, the weekly resource for news, trends, and the people who influence the world of photography and cinematography. Hosted by veteran photographer and filmmaker Jim Mckay.
Growing up in New York City, cinematographer Charles Libin absorbed the gritty 70s-era filmmaking of movies made in Manhattan like Taxi Driver, Mean Streets, and Dog Day Afternoon. The Brooklyn-based cinematographer has over the years done documentary camera work on several Jonathan Demme films, including his Neil Young Trilogy, and numerous performance films, including Julian Schnabel's Lou Reed Berlin, as well as feature work for Jim Mckay's En El Séptimo Día, one of the Hollywood Reporter's 10 best films of the year. Libin's latest documentary work is the soon-to-be-released The Gift, The Journey of Johnny Cash. We sat down with Charlie to discuss his influences growing up in such a heady time in New York during the evolution of on-location shooting. But first, a look at Charlie's camera work in a trailer from Mongolian director Byamba Sakya's dramatic feature debut, Remote Control.
Another, it's funny how jobs come to you. Stuart Dryberg, who brought me on to do the second unit work on Boardwalk Empire on the pilot, called me up and said, Charlie, I just came back from Mongolia, and I met this really interesting director there, and he's doing a film. I can't do it. It's not going to fit my schedule. Would you be interested in going to Mongolia, shooting a film? And I was like, sure, I'm thinking I'm not going to get this job, and I had a Skype interview with Byamba Sakya, who's Mongolian, he had made some documentaries, and I had shot some small films and some documentary stuff, and he liked my work, and we had a Skype conversation that went really well, which is always weird to be doing these Skype interviews, but he's on the other side of the world. It was the only way to do it. And so we had very limited resources. It was a Mongolian crew. We were working with what I thought was ARRI equipment, but some of it was, made in China and had the ARRI logo on it.
Really?
It wasn't as reliable.
Wow.
But that probably won't fly. In any case, there were certain scenes where, we would shoot at dusk, the story required it. And, we would talk about mapping it out and, having worked with DPs like Stuart Dryberg, Paul Cameron, and, some of these really experienced DPs, and you'd see certain approaches, you'd start a scene at dusk, you'd underexpose it in the beginning, you'd tweak the color temperature, and you basically back into the last light that you're going to capture. You'd have to scramble, but we did a few scenes like that on Remote Control that were just purely available light. I mean, in a way, every DP really wants the most perfect available light when they're shooting with daylight. It's the biggest frustration with shooting available light is the sun's always moving. So there's certain scenes, and that's the other thing that you come to realize reading a script. If you have a scene that's a dusk or a magic hour scene, an eighth of a page, you can just nail that in the proper time of day. You know, I recently did a film that had, that isn't out yet, but it had a dusk scene that was about 15 pages, and pretty much just sat down with the director and, dialed it in and shaped the arc of time there so that the dusk part of it was only the last minute or two of that scene. But if you need to maintain, you have to recreate it. But if you're Stanley Kubrick and you're on you're shooting Barry Lyndon, which was ZEISS lenses that were, shot by the astronauts in the Apollo 11 mission, and I think they shot
T.9 or something.
So they're basically shooting, half the stop wide open from what I've shot a lot with the super speeds. I shot the remote control, the Beyond Basakya film in Mongolia. That whole film was just a set of super speeds. It's funny with this, how you decide what lenses to use. I try to sometimes come up with adjectives that might describe my feeling about certain lenses. And, for example, the remote control we shot on super speeds, but then in El Séptimo Día I shot on ultra primes. A lot of it was handheld, and somehow I think of ultra primes as sort of these masculine lenses that are a little less romantic than the super speeds. I don't know, other DPs probably see them in different ways, but there's a process with the director where we'll shoot some tests, or if there's not, sometimes you just don't have time or resources, so you'll go back and I might share something that I shot with another lens set. I just shot a short for a director who's a director choreographer, Susan Meisner, a film called Bend, which is a beautiful film, dance film, and we shot master primes for that, just so I could be really wide open. And we played a lot with, the plane of focus. We'd have dancers come into the plane of focus in a really elegant way, and because it's out in a stadium, sometimes you'd see the lights and beautiful bokehs in the background. But I think that, having worked as an operator and second unit DP for other DPs and seen there's a range of approaches, and you sort of find your own path, and somehow those experiences and seeing sometimes what does or doesn't work inform me. And again, these small films, I'm not working with the DIT, I'm using false color, which is, for me, it's almost like shooting with a spot meter, the zone system. When I was younger, I took a photography course at the Y up near me, up in the Upper West Side, and when you learn about photography and you study Ansel Adams, and one of the revelations I had was the use of a spot meter in measuring the zone system. One of the masters of that is Ed Lockman, who I did some second unit work for. You're forced to really look and see the values in a frame if you're using the spot meter. And one of the nice things about, if you don't have a DIT, and we're out in Mongolia, I'm working off a monitor. It's getting banged around. I don't know how well it's calibrated. So I pretty much use the airy false color as the same way I would use a Pentax meter with its own scale on it, And I played that film really on the edge of exposure. So really playing on the bottom end. And once, it's what I love about the areas. I've just gotten very familiar with what that false color represents, and so whatever LUT is in there, if I've got consistency on that, like in here, we have this beautiful north light and, clouds getting hit by the sun. It fluctuates, and, your eye adapts to what you're looking at, but if you keep checking the false color, even if the quality of the light is the same, the value could shift a stopper so you don't realize it. So I'm always, on these small films, I'm always checking the false color as I'm shooting.
And do you use a spot meter?
I mean, I use a spot meter for film, and maybe if I'm lighting a set, I'll use a meter. I've got to say, I tend to use the false color, you know. Yeah. Well, you know, I grew up in New York City. You know, I went to movies as much as I could. I went to see, you know, the Kung Fu movies in Times Square, but I also lived near the Thalia, so I saw movies at the Thalia. And in my late teens, I started to become more intrigued with some of the European films, Godard, Truffaut, Jacques Rivette, and Italians, Antonioni. But it was when I saw Mean Streets that I realized, okay, you know, those types of films are being done here, you know. And then I would go to the Lincoln Center Library, this is before the internet, so I would go to the Lincoln Center Library, which had, you know, they had issues of Cahiers du Cinema. I don't speak French, but I looked through the pictures and started to really focus in on the various contributors and collaborators on the films that I really liked, you know. So I would see, for example, okay, you know, for example, Raoul Coutard, who was a French DP, and I really was intrigued by lighting and photography. I took a lot of stills when I was a kid around the city. You know, I had a Minolta with a really nice rocker lens. I took a lot of stills. And I saw movies being shot on the streets in New York. I saw some of Taxi Driver being filmed. I saw some of 3 Days of the Condor, Marathon Man. I would hear about these movies on location. I'd go hang out and, you know, I'd wait for like 2 hours to see, you know, Robert Redford, and there'd be his double walking up and down. And finally he'd come out, and 30 seconds later they'd have this shot, and they'd all back up. But I really was affected by Mean Streets, and you know, I lived in the Upper West Side, but I knew the Village a little, and I had just never seen a movie shot on the streets in New York that captured the city in what felt like a very realistic way. And then, of course, came all the great movies, New York movies of the 70s, French Connection and Serpico, and I just loved and again, because I was interested in photography, I started to really zero in on who the DPs of those movies were. You know, Owen Royspin, okay, he did French Connection. You know, he did Taken to the Pelham 1, 2, 3. You know, and I'd see the sort of.
Did he do Exorcist?
Exorcist? No, I don't think he did. Maybe. I feel like William Fraker. Maybe. I'm not sure.
Fraker,
I'm not sure.
I was thinking Friedkin and.
Yeah. But, and then, you know, I remember reading about Scorsese talking about how John Cassavetes influenced him and sought out the movie Shadows, you know, which kind of feels, it's really a precursor to Mean Streets. And both those films were very influenced by the French New Wave, you know. So you had filmmakers Godard and Truffaut and Rivette who were shooting, you know, available light, a lot of handheld photography. And again, Raoul Coutard, there's a DP who, he died, I think, only a year or two ago, but unbelievable body of work. So that intrigued me, and I was kind of screwing up in school pretty badly, and but I heard about, so I thought, like, I'd love to go to film school, but there's no way I'm going to get into NYU or USC. But I started to hear about SUNY Purchase, which was a pretty new art school that had a dance program and painting and photography and filmmaking. And so I went up, I took, you know, in those days, not many people had films because kids weren't shooting video. Maybe some kids had some Super 8 movies. I had one little thing I spliced together, but I brought a portfolio of still photographs up there and had an interview with Willard Van Dyke and Dick Rogers. And Willard Van Dyke, I didn't really realize it, whose presence I was in until after the interview. I did some research, but he was instrumental throughout the WPA Act and contemporary of Paul Strand and Stieglitz, and he ended up he was instrumental in curating and running the film program and photography program at MoMA, and really sort of looking at photography as an art form. So I'm sitting there chatting with these guys, and they pretty much said, you seem to know a lot about filmmaking and photography, and you seem pretty smart. Your grades aren't that great, but they accepted me, which was, I felt now that I look back, very lucky, because I had professors who lived in New York City, kind of like probably for you in SVA. I had professors who were working in film. One very influential professor was Ara Mavakian, who was an editor, one of the first editors on The Godfather, and he's actually the person who recommended Gordon Willis to Coppola. He had shot a movie called End of the Road that Aram directed, and I remember him saying to us, you've got to make the films you want to make, because as time progresses, it's only going to get harder and harder. So I started, gaffing for other friends at film school, and we would all sort of help each other out. And I got a job bartending at a Hurrah nightclub where I was a bartender, and some of that, most of it was, this was in, between 79, 80, 81, some of the best music in New York, punk and some of the no wave musicians, and the B-52s were coming, and a friend of mine, Paul Cameron, is now a DP, ASC DP, who he and I were roommates and partners in crime, and we ended up filming the B-52s, performing Rock Lobster on film with equipment from the school, and it was became a whole thing. We ended up getting kicked out of school because we didn't have permission to use the equipment. It was a long story. Really? But then we started filming bands at the club, and so I started out shooting a lot of music and working as a gaffer, and over the years, I still to this day do a lot of music stuff. I'll go out, friends doing a film. I just recently worked on a couple of these Bruce Springsteen films that Tom Zimney, the director, did, and I DP'd a documentary on Johnny Cash for Tom Zimney that's coming out soon. So I've always loved filming music. Yeah. I worked for a lot of very, very influential DPs. I worked as an operator or as a gaffer, and learned a lot, not just about the technical aspects of the cinematography, but also about the creative process and some of the politics that go into, you're managing a crew as a DP, you're deciding to choose your battles, what realistically you can fight for. Often if you're really fortunate, you'll have an AD that you can kind of partner with and find ways to be efficient with the schedule, but at the same time, that's one scene we want to capture, at magic hour and carry into dusk, and so you have to be pretty creative with the light in terms of what's natural on these smaller films. For example, like the light in here, we've got northern light coming through, and these beautiful skylight, and lights bouncing off that big white cloud. It's gorgeous light. To recreate that, if we didn't have that, we'd have to take, 3 or 4 12K HMIs, bounce them into a big white butterfly and then maybe put another half soft frost in front and basically beat the hell out of the light to get it this soft. So, you know, on a film like Jim's movie, we had lights. It wasn't like we shot everything available, but we didn't have those sort of resources. So mapping out a shot, mapping out a scene, you know, that you relied on the natural light became really, the scheduling of how we were going to shoot that became critical. And actually, for example, on El Séptimo Día, a lot of that film takes place in real time during a soccer game.
¿Contra quién juega la semifinal?
Chinanza, el domingo. Va a ser un juego muy duro.
Por el domingo, por el capitán.
Jose, here's the deal. I need everyone on Sunday. I have a private party after brunch on Sunday. These are important people coming in here. I need all hands on deck. Thanks, Jose.
Está muy mal. Se le está hinchando la rodilla como un globo.
No puedes trabajar el domingo o nos dan en la madre, güey. O nos dan en la madre o me corren.
You're trying to get out of work on Sunday so you can go play soccer. Are you serious?
Estás metido en una situación muy difícil, José. Tú eres una persona responsable pero sabes lo que tienes que hacer.
And the whole idea is that game is late afternoon and it's going to carry into dusk just as the game is ending. And then there'd be a little scene just off the side of the field where the light is fading. And I'm reading the script just thinking, man, you know, it's going to be tough. You know, if we're lucky, we'll get a second camera for some of this. But when we scouted it, the people who were running the field in Sunset Park basically said, you know, you guys can't shoot here between 11 and 3. And I was just like, thank you. You know, it's in the summer, the sun's like tracking over there.
Don't want to.
So I would hang out on that field for like 3 or 4 days and take pictures and track the sun, you know, use the sun path and pretty much presented a concept to Jim, which is that, you know, we had this canopy of trees where we could have the benches and have most of the spectators, and we could shoot that separately, and we could shoot some of that in the middle of the day because we're under this canopy already, and then we would so we'd have, let's say we had maybe 7 days, and of course, you know, we're working with real people, so we would come out there and shoot those. I think we had like 3 or 4 weekends in a row that we did the games, and then we'd move inside when we had availability, you know. But that was an example of just, you know, being lucky that we couldn't shoot, because, you know, if you're doing, let's say, a TV series, you're not going to be able to say to the showrunner, you know, I can only shoot at Magic Hour 4 days in a row. This isn't Nestor Almendros.
Right.
You know, I'm not Terrence Malick. But that was a situation where the frustration that production had with not being able to film all day actually was a gift photographically.
Interesting.
Two of the fondest filmmaking experiences I had were Remote Control in Mongolia and El Séptimo Día here in Brooklyn. And both those films are foreign language films, essentially. Remote Control is all Mongolian, and El Séptimo Día is primarily Spanish, which I do not speak. I speak a little bit of Russian. My grandpa was Russian. I took it a little bit when I was younger, and in Mongolia that helped me a little bit. But what's kind of great as a cinematographer shooting a film that's not your native tongue is it's all about telling the story with the image and feeling like you're conveying the essence. You know, I look at a script, I see a scene, and every scene on a good script, every scene will sort of have this like apex peak of the scene where it's sort of, that's the essence of the scene and that's the moment you want to capture. And it might even just be a reaction off one of the actors. But if you don't understand, you know, I had translated scripts and I had translators that I worked with. And in fact, Jim said to me in our first interview, so Charlie, you know, do you speak Spanish? And I was like, you know, not very well. I mean, I grew up in New York. I know some like Spanish, a couple curses here and there, but and he's like, good, because I don't speak Spanish either. And it's actually better because I don't want to feel like, you know, people keep looking to you. This way, you know, we'll be on equal ground. And you know, he wrote the script. A lot of people who have seen that film, you know, who are Spanish and are from, you know, Puebla, Mexico, where a lot of these characters have arrived from, just are staggered that the film was written by, you know, an American, Anglo-American. But again, it's without speaking the language, you're forced to really tell the story with the image. You know? Try to do work that really, really is close to your heart. So, you know, I do documentaries, but I'll also do features and television work, but trying to balance it out, you know, and there are not many, you know, directors or DPs. It's very easy to get pigeonholed. You know, it's hard to do that. But I feel lucky. I've had, you know, Tom Zimney, Jonathan Demme, opportunities with directors who, you know, brought me on for these documentaries that are labors of love for them and become labors of love for me. You know?
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, the way that remote control looks, it's such a lush, and you know, I love the way you said it's the lower end, you know, it has some very dark, but you know, the color is so great, and you know. Well,
I was also very lucky on remote control to have Joe Gowler at Harbor. He's a colorist who, you know, there's a handful of colorists who I've worked with, and you know, you come into those sessions, sometimes you don't have a lot of time to really get kind of a dialogue going, but we really hit it off, and he did it very quickly. He really found the, you know, the magic of that landscape. I mean, I will say also, you know, when you're shooting in Mongolia, you're dealing with, you know, a population that uses a lot of coal and there's a lot of atmosphere in the sky. So when the sun is low, you know, you've got this incredible quality of light that sadly comes from some pretty toxic particles, but you know, it does influence the quality of light.
So that's viewable on Amazon now?
That's viewable, yeah.
Took a while. I think you said it took a while for it to
yeah, it's
make
funny. You know, I remote control. You know, it went on the festival circuit. It was invited to Camera Image, which was a great treat for me to go and hang out with a bunch of my heroes, and you know, maybe I think a couple of years went by before it became available on Amazon, so it's sort of frustrating, but now it is. It's been very gratifying.
Charlie, thank you very much for coming.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it.
Thanks,
really appreciate it. And hopefully we can come back and talk about the next project.
That'd be great. No, it's a really honor to be able to share with you.
What do you get when you combine over 125 years of camera lens heritage and the latest in autofocus technology? The ZEISS Bodice. Engineered exclusively for Sony mirrorless full-frame sensor cameras, the ZEISS Bodice delivers perfect corner-to-corner image quality. With enhanced protection against the elements, the ZEISS bodice is built to help you push past life's obstacles. ZEISS bodice, the perfect lens for wherever your passion leads you.
Thanks for tuning in. Join us next time for another edition of ZEISS Full Exposure. If you can't watch, you can always catch the audio-only version on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Follow us on Instagram at ZEISS_full exposure or on the web at ZEISSfullexposure.com. And to learn more about the latest in ZEISS lenses, head to ZEISS.com.